All your gender, I think. Actually, all right, hey y'all, hey y'all. Here, if I we're just a big crowd for us tonight. So you guys outside on the patio, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you can hear me. I'm loud, which is usually a problem, but I think tonight it might work out in my favor for the first time in my life. And my mother is looking at me right now, going, "Yeah, thank God it's finally working for you." All right, so welcome to all of our new and returning faces. This is Books, News, and Brains. I always want to start out with a huge thank you. First off, to our wonderful hosts here at Strangebird. If this is your first time, grab a drink and grab a ramen. 'Cause I'm telling you, this is amazing. And the drinks are even better. So thank you so much to Strangebird for hosting. Um, and then obviously thank you to Indiana Humanities, Indiana Sciences for being great partners with us in this event. And gosh, 14 or 15, I think we've been doing this. It's been a long time. So I just want to thank everybody for all of your hard work to help make this event possible. And yes, we're getting the house music turned down. I know. Um, but yeah, anyways, welcome. So before we get started, I want to introduce, I know you're all here for John Green, you're all here for Everything is Tuberculosis. But here to talk about the book is our wonderful expert, Bill Sullivan. Bill, nobody knows you quite the way you do. So go ahead and introduce yourself and your background and how it relates to this book.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate you joining the very successful book club that we have here. I was especially thrilled that I would be talking about Everything is Tuberculosis. I'm a professor at the IU School of Medicine in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. Tuberculosis is one of the diseases that I lecture medical students about, and I work on a variety of other infectious diseases and have researched them as well. So when people think of germs or hear about nasty diseases, they usually think of me. I'm not quite sure what that says, but it's good to be thought of in some way. But yeah, I've been at the high school of medicine for 25 years now. So yeah, quite a long time. And hopefully I will be able to contribute a little more to the conversation, uh, maybe expand on some of the wonderful points that John Green made. So, thanks for having me.
Also, did mention also a local Indianapolis author, by the way, and your book, Pleased to Meet Me. If you are a part of this book club, you've read this book as part of our series. If you have not read the book, highly recommend Pleased to Meet Me by Bill Sullivan. You can find it probably where you can find those books. Now, John Green, did anybody raise their hand if you listened to the audiobook on this? Did anyone listen to the audiobook? John Green narrated his own audiobook, and I felt like, at least for me, and I was talking to some of you guys about this earlier, I feel like that gives the book a different feeling when I can hear it in the author's voice. You really hear him give like the inflection. You can hear him writing the book almost, and I really felt like I was on this journey of him learning about TV. Were you offered the chance to narrate your own book, your own audiobook?
No, I wasn't. It was published by National Geographic, and they have their own in-house, you know, group that does those sorts of things. I guess it's Disney now. They've been bought out. So, yeah, I'm not. Yeah, more like. Yeah, I can't say. You know, with Disney, there comes a whole bunch of new laws and regulations. It is involved. So, but yeah, the full book, and thanks for mentioning it. It's called Pleased to Meet Me: Genes, Germs, and Mysterious Forces That Make Us Who We Are. It is a book that basically tries to explain the biology behind why people do the things they do, why we believe the things we believe, and things of that nature. And it So it's a little bit of an eye opener because a lot of the research and maybe the reasons you think people are behaving a certain way, uh, there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. Okay? There's genes that contribute, there's environmental factors, and there's germs. Uh, I don't think he covered this in his book, not so much, but it's obvious that when germs infect us, or even symbiotic germs that live with us normally, they alter our behavior in sometimes subtle ways and sometimes drastic ways. Not just symptoms of disease, but literal behavioral change. So really interesting facet of human behavior that we don't think about a great deal. But it does echo the point that I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, how diseases can shape society. They can literally change the course of humanity based on how severe they are and what the consequences are.
Absolutely. If you wrote a book, would it be everything is toxic? Is that is that going to be your next one?
I'm hoping that John sees this or something, and he'll say, "I'm going to talk to that toxoplasma guy." Toxoplasma gondii is the parasite I study in my lab, and I think John should definitely write a sequel called "Toxoplasma is Everything" because it really is. 3 billion people in the world carry this parasite that they get from or undercooked meat, or sorry everyone, raw shellfish, probably on the menu, but it's probably fine here. Um, but yeah, it's spread around in many different ways, so that's why so many people are infected. And it usually doesn't cause overt symptoms of disease, but it does go to the brain, and there's studies that suggest it changes behavior in some very interesting ways. So that's toxoplasma. We can talk for hours about that if we want, but I think we're here for tuberculosis.
No, we're just giving a spoiler into John Green's sequel, which is going to be co-authored by you. We're manifesting that for the world. Okay, it's a no-brainer. But as the kids say. So let's start with tuberculosis. Let's start with the germ itself, the bacteria itself. So John, multiple times throughout the book, talks about how tuberculosis has a thick cell wall. Now, as a researcher, when you hear that a bacteria has a thick cell wall, what does that mean to you about the biology of the bacteria, but also maybe its mode of transmission and how it behaves?
Right, so bacteria are just one type of germ. They're bigger than viruses, but smaller than parasites, microscopic. And most bacteria fall into two categories, gram positive or gram negative, and it's based on the constituents of its cell wall. Now, the cell wall is normally a unique thing because our cells don't have these cell walls that surround most bacteria, and they're made of molecules that our body doesn't produce and that our body doesn't need. And this is what makes most antibiotics so well tolerated. Our cells don't have cell walls, bacteria do. So drugs that are designed to destroy that cell wall will hurt the bacteria, but pretty much leave us alone. So cell walls are not necessarily a bad thing. But where they do get complicated is in this TB bug. TB is not gram positive, it's not gram negative. It has a very interesting surrounding to the cell, and it's called mycoplasma. That's the name of the bacterium that you might recall from the book. And most of our conventional antibiotics that work on just about every other type of bacteria are useless against this particular bacteria. So it makes it a real challenge. And as you alluded to, it's because of this unique capsule that surrounds this particular bug. Makes it really hard to treat, and it makes it really difficult for your immune system to see it. So it can hide in the body for pretty much the rest of the person's life in either a latent form or an active form. So it's a really strange bug. It's kind of an exception in the bacterial world, and it's really challenging to devise new drugs against it. And that's why when we do, we have to guard them very preciously because if that bacterium becomes resistant, to those precious antibiotics, we're back at square one. And unfortunately, as many of you probably know, that's a pretty common thing. A lot of infections are no longer treatable with penicillin or amoxicillin because they're resistant. So when we get resistance to a TB drug, which has happened on multiple occasions, we get a bug that's almost impossible to treat. Or if we can treat it, it costs maybe 100 times more to treat that patient than someone with drug susceptible version.
So antibiotic resistance is not just a problem in the tuberculosis world. This is a problem across infectious diseases.
It absolutely is, and it's only getting worse. These, yeah, not to spread too much bad news, but there's scientists like me who are trying to work on the problem. We need funding to do it. Um, so, yeah, drug resistance in this country alone um, kills about 60,000 people a year. Simple bacterial infections that doctors are helpless to treat because they're resistant to every single antibiotic we can throw at them. Worldwide, that number balloons into the millions. So it's a really devastating problem. And TB is obviously within that group of what we call superbugs that can evolve this resistance very quickly to the drugs that we have. And yeah, drug resistance is a very interesting story. Penicillin, as some of you may know, was pretty much the first commercial antibiotic. There were some predecessors and prequels, if you will, but none made the biggest splash as penicillin did because it was so effective and so safe. But resistance appeared 5 years after penicillin was introduced into the mainstream, which was about 1940. And Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, predicted this. He thought it would happen far in the future, but it happened just 5 years after penicillin was introduced. Yeah, well, these bacteria, most of them replicate every 30 minutes. So they have the ability to evolve very quickly. And when they're in the presence of these drugs, any bacteria that just happens to get a random mutation that makes it resistant is going to flourish. And it takes off like wildfire, not only in the patient, but in naive hosts as well. So it spreads around very quickly. Now, TB is a little unusual as a bacterium in that it grows very slowly, still a lot faster than we reproduce. It takes about a whole day for active TB to replicate, which is an eternity in bacteria time. Like I said, most of them only take 30 minutes, but it still generates resistance quite readily. And that is a problem when it comes to devising drugs, because there are not a whole lot of people in this world trying to make new antibiotics. They're simply not profitable. Even for infections that we deal with in America, no big pharmaceutical company works on antibiotics with the idea that they're going to make a lot of money from it. You can't make a lot of money from a disease where the patient only takes the drug for 7 to 10 days. It's as simple as that. Um, so they like to treat chronic diseases that, uh, they have a customer for life. And I'm not trying to slam big pharma. I'm not trying to slam industry. That's just the nature of the beast. And there's just no incentives. They would go out of business if they were to try to make an antibiotic where patients weren't using it very frequently. And most new antibiotics that do come along are not even given to patients. We hold them in reserve because we don't want resistance to accrue. So we keep them in the medicine cabinet locked away as a last resort. Okay. So that just compounds the problem and further de-incentivizes industry from pursuing that kind of research. And it's the same thing with TB drugs.
Yes, so this is not only a global problem, when we look at it in the context of TB, like we did through this book, but I mean, it really is, I mean, an ongoing active problem, not just for TB. So, when you talk about you're doing research, researchers like you are trying to do this, even I'm assuming, maybe a big assumption here, that researchers like you do the work you do because you hope it will save lives and that you hope it will have an impact on the communities that are suffering, right? But as we saw through this book, right, and as John Green showed us, there is impact to be had, impact to be made. Doesn't always mean that impact will reach those who need it. So as a researcher, and he talks about the cost benefit analysis of tuberculosis treatment. And he compares it to that of what his brother, for those of you who don't know, John Green has a brother named Hank Green. He compares it to the cancer treatment that his brother received. There was never a cost benefit analysis done, right, of whether it's worthwhile to treat his cancer or whether he should receive that treatment because it's too expensive, right? We should have prevented it. Sorry, too bad. But that is happening with TB. And so that brings us to our first turn talk. Now, if you're new here, hi, I hope you're sitting with friends. And if you're not, you are surrounded by friends. So for our turn talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present you with a question or a prompt. I'll give you guys like 5 minutes. And then for those of you who are on our live stream, me and Bill will continue to talk. And then we'll come back and we can discuss this as a group. So I think this is a really important point. And I think you are going to have some really great insight for the group. But I want to ask, after reading this book, are there any other diseases, or sorry, wrong question. What do you think is different about this cost benefit analysis when we look at cancer versus tuberculosis? What about these diseases? What about that analysis is different? We're presenting with some examples in the book that you can bring up, but maybe there are some that were presented in the book that you think are really important and should have. So think about the cost benefit analysis of tuberculosis versus cancer as presented in the book, as John Green presented us with. I'll give you 5 minutes to talk about it, and then we'll come back and we'll solve all the world problems, right? Because that's what we do here. It's okay. Renamed the moon a couple weeks ago. It's fine. Probably should split it out. Right. But it's real. Very proud. We have a new not just in the drug. Yeah. Drugs. So the minister does not. Diabetes, right? Yeah. Oh, and that's how we go. Already written this one. I got it. Wow. Everyone has, sorry. It's also the salons. I lived in the yes. I'm on both perfect. So perfect to be honest. Not even. You're right. Should have. You're right. Means what? Get the one. Maybe imagine you.
Work wonders.
Yeah.
But I think that the depression. That is why the story so there's an because if we don't get ahead of them, like I said, what really scares me and the other idea that happens is that and so drugs, we want to say, okay, you have to chill out for 8 years. Of the worst pandemic. But that's and Because literally for very research labs looking at and it's so that they can administer great marketing to still years as a consequence of you're going to form. So not only is it because the benefit because I'm not
Hey, hello. Oh, I see the drinks are flowing and the conversation is a go. Sorry. Okay, so what do you think about this cost benefit analysis, how tuberculosis compares? I mean, John Green brought it up multiple times, comparing tuberculosis to cancer. What are your thoughts on why this is different? Why this is approach different? Get into kind of our discussion, but if you've been here before, you know that I will get our guests on a tangent. And so you best believe we got off on a tangent. And I love a good tangent. Yeah. So we definitely agree that it's not so much it's just for the facts. Oh, they will pay more attention. Just like here in the United States, we have TV pretty under control. Like 400 people die. Yeah. Whereas cancer is a big problem, even if you're rich, or even just. That's such a great point. You would, yeah. problem with reading really dense, really interesting books is that there's so much to talk about. And I've told you all this before. Selfishly, I talk about the things that I think are interesting and that I pick up on, but I want to know what you pick up on and what you have questions about. Yeah, hold on. About the castle, such as the castle, like, yeah, yeah. Yeah, why do some people encapsulate the tuberculosis? And for those, I think it's, they just carry the disease. They don't necessarily get sick and die versus those who do not encapsulate the disease. Do you know if there's research on that mechanism, why that happens?
Yep. We don't know the complete answer to that, but what it seems to boil down to is probably a genetic component that affects the immune system in such a way that it is better at encapsulating and more, kind of pushing the infection to a inert form. Whereas in other people, there's something different about their immune system fundamentally that just allows the bug to stay in its active form. And this may also waver with different environmental things that happen. So we do know that people get more susceptible the older they get. The very young are also still susceptible, probably because the immune system is not fully ramped up yet. And people with immunocompromised conditions are obviously more vulnerable to active TB. In fact, co-infection with HIV is one of the most significant problems that is faced in many nations in Africa. So, summing up, I think it's genetics and environmental factors that conspire together to dictate whether it goes active or latent.
It's a great question. Yes.
Behind you.
Yeah, the second most famous physicist behind him. Yeah, in 1945. Interesting. So in 1945, you got diagnosed as a treatment of tuberculosis.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting. Um, in 1945, we would not have had the antibiotic needed to kill tuberculosis at that time. They came down the pike a little later on. Penicillin and some of the, by 1945, we still only had a single digit number of antibiotics. I don't think any of them would have had appreciable activity against tuberculosis. And I'm not familiar with the diagnostics of that particular situation and why they might have missed it. Part of the reason might have been because tuberculosis wasn't as common as it used to be. So, doctors, if they see stripes, they think zebras. They were probably thinking this is just standard pneumonia. Don't worry about it. You'll get over it. And of course, it wasn't.
Oh, sorry. Didn't see over there. Hi.
Hey, for the there is a vaccine for tuberculosis. It's not a very great vaccine. I think I heard you say that the for developing better. Talk a bit more about that. How long that would take different.
Yeah, so the question is about the tuberculosis vaccine you mentioned earlier, and that the one is that exists now, it's a little crappy. And we could make a new one. So what's that process look like? We had infinite money.
Yeah, so the vaccine that I spoke about, and to be honest, I don't know too much about it, but it's relatively new. And it only seems to confer protection in infants. It doesn't seem to work very well in older populations, which is a little interesting, a little atypical of vaccines in general. Um, and it doesn't really prevent against the lung form of TB, which is the most common. it seems to be better at preventing systemic TB going throughout the rest of the body. If the vaccinated child still develops lung TB, that's still going to have to be treated. So that's my understanding of the current vaccine and why it's not really worth writing home about at this point. But there are investigators who are very interested who think it's possible to develop a vaccine against tuberculosis. The vaccines, just in a very broad sense, work by informing your immune system of some component of the pathogen so that they can create a proper response when they encounter that pathogen in life. So the advent of mRNA vaccines may change the whole landscape of how we look at tuberculosis. Because with mRNA vaccines, you can accelerate vaccine development like never before, because it's just infinitely faster and easier to develop it. And COVID-19 showed us that they're remarkably safe and effective. So this should allow us to accelerate vaccination programs in the hope of alerting the immune system to what this bug looks like so that it can ramp up its own response. Now, that said, not every single pathogen that infects human beings is going to be vaccinatable. Is that a word? I'm not sure. Um, so, for example, malaria caused by the parasite called Plasmodium. People have been trying to develop a malaria vaccine for decades. They failed miserably. Just like with TB, there is a vaccine for malaria out there, but it is really not all that great. So part of the reason for that is because the parasite keeps changing. And it will basically, what we told the immune system to look out for, it will lose that feature or change it. So our vaccine becomes kind of useless. TB may have that same property, we don't know yet. But the good news is with mRNA vaccines, we have the ability to try a whole bunch of different um, variables quite quickly. Meeting once a year. Well, not to get too technical, but the Woods Hole meeting is just parasitology. And TB is a bacterium. And we don't invite bacterium people to our parasite meeting.
Don't let them step on your turf. That's a different meeting. We take them to probably somewhere nice. Sorry, everybody in Massachusetts, I'm so sorry. Are there any other questions for Bill? Yeah. The skin test for TB. What does the skin test for TB look for exactly?
Another really good question. I think that just looks to see if you have what we call antigens that TB would put into the body or during an active infection or even a latent one. That'll pick up on the skin test. So you might recall from the book, not everybody who is infected with TB exhibits obvious symptoms. They can be carriers of it. But the skin test will identify whether you have ever been infected because it'll put a little bit of the TB antigen in your arm. And if your immune system has seen those antigens before, they will react. I think you mentioned that it's a failed vaccine. Tuberculosis was originally developed as a vaccine. It's like, it didn't work as a vaccine, but guess what? It's initiate some kind of immune response to use it. Yeah, thanks. That's right.
Another great example, by the way, of science fails turning into huge wins. Go science.
You got to play the game to try. A lot of scientific and medical discoveries were by accident, but they would not have been accidents if people weren't out there trying.
That's why it's important to fund all research. That's fun research. Hey, you had something.
So, that decades going for the popularity, vaccines have suddenly become, and
Yeah.
because when I was 10 years old, not
Yeah.
the culture. kind of go against the science. And fight against it.
Yeah, how do we fight? Yeah. It's the Iron Man. Let's talk about the modern discourse, popular discourse around vaccines and how it's gone from something that nobody really talked about, was pretty well taken up, and now it's suddenly under the spotlight. Uh, suddenly you have 10,000 Facebook experts on vaccines. I didn't know there were so many people across the world who had vaccine research labs in their garage. Great.
When's this place closed? We could talk about that topic, for hours. In fact, there's probably books written on the subject that maybe the book club wants to pick up later on. But I'll try to be brief because I share that concern immensely. Vaccines are the most important tool that have ever been developed in the context of combating infectious disease. They're far more safer and effective and cheaper than treating things with drugs. So it is utterly depressing, not only as an infectious disease researcher, to see vaccines being doubted and even disrespected, but seeing scientists, who work on infectious disease treated the same way. Um, these people should be the heroes, And there's been a disinformation campaign, an anti-science campaign, as Peter Oakes has called it, that have diminished people's trust in the very authorities who are supposed to be protecting them. And instead of trusting people with scientific degrees or degrees in medicine, they're now trusting politicians and pundits. And I don't know what you call RFK Jr. Maybe a little bit of both. I call him an opportunistic parasite. And I know parasites. But to your question, how can we turn the tide? The iron lung principle is something I'm a big fan of. Not that I want to see a lot of people get sick, but put what life used to be like before vaccines back out into the public eye. What really baffles me, however, is we saw this during COVID, is that some people who were skeptical or denied the vaccine on their deathbed were asking for it. Too late, buddy. It's not going to do anything for you now. And they might die from it. So when you can tap into someone's fear, that usually motivates them to trust an expert once again. I don't like using fear though. I don't like hyperbole and, just laying down this hammer, of a wall. But this is why mandates were so important, because there's this concept of herd immunity, which is very real. And, we are experiencing this with the measles outbreak right now. We have the highest number of measles cases in this country, I think, in over a decade, which is just inexcusable. We have great, safe, effective vaccines against this. And what we usually see during these outbreaks, and it's a shame it has to come to this, especially after a child or two dies from something that is imminently preventable, you start seeing a lot more vaccine uptake. So I think that's just maybe the nature of the beast right now. Humans really don't respond unless they have a personal sense of tragedy or see something with their own eyes. And that's a shame. And we can point to all sorts of reasons why that's the case. But again, to bring up RFK Jr.'s name, he has made millions and millions of dollars on anti-vax rhetoric. And there's a lot of money to be made in going around and bashing scientists and doctors and telling them, don't trust them, trust us. For some reason, people do that. Maybe they've been burned by the medical, medicine before, or had someone close to them, don't trust their doctor, whatever. There's all kinds of different stories. When you talk to a fair number of people who are vaccine hesitant or just flat out aren't going to get it. And the reasons are a lot more variable than what you might expect. And it's really difficult to come up with a one size fits all formula. But what I would like to see is kind of going back to when I was growing up, probably the same time you were, where doctors and scientists and medicine were heralded as miracles. You know, the part of the reason I became a scientist was because I learned about the ones when I was a kid, and I said, I want to be a hero like that. And I don't think we're considered heroes anymore, believe it or not.
Yeah. And I watched Phil 9, the science guy, and I said, he's pretty cool. I don't want to be like that. And I also want to point out that that's part of the reason we do this book club, and part of the reason that like Indiana Sciences and Indiana Humanities has worked so hard to put on events like this, and we do, like Day for Science, Central Indiana Science Outreach. There's a lot of groups like this that have popped up over the years, and to do events like this, because of this distrust of, we'll call it the establishment, the man, the ivory tower, that is this imperceptible, inhuman being that operates in the far corners of the world, and they have a message that I'm supposed to take, and I don't want it. Who are these people anyway? Who do they think they are? Well, they're Bill, and you know, um, there are other experts who have, they're Matt, they're all the people that you see. I mean, they're people like me. I was a researcher for a hot minute. Um, like we're people, we're your neighbors. If you live anywhere in the state of Indiana, we have, how many world-class research facilities and institutions. These are not imperceptible, inhuman machines, turning out these research papers and a narrative and a thing for you to believe without ever seeing evidence. And no, we want you to use the truth of your eyes, the evidence of your eyes and ears to come to your own conclusions. And because you're the expert, you help us do that. And that is why we invite you to these things, and why we invite you to read books like John Green's book, or To Engineer is Human, or if you're interested in Superbugs, The Purple Predator. Also, it's a book we read, I think it's years ago now. I think you may have also been an expert for that. I probably sounds about right. Where we talk about superbugs. Yes, and we actually got to interview Stephanie, the author, and her husband, who are the main characters of the book. We got to do a live video call with them. Fascinating book, by the way, if you want to learn more about superbugs, and some of the really cool ways that we're trying to treat those with viruses. So use 2 negatives equal a positive, maybe. Use the virus to, I don't know, something about rock, paper, scissors. But that's part of why we do this. And so I thank you. I just want to end cap this by saying thank you all for coming and enjoying John Green's book with us. Thank you, Bill, for your expertise and your time. We very much appreciate it. And for those of you who maybe this is your first time coming, or this is your first time learning about us, I have a sign-up sheet. Go ahead and drop us your email. We do books like this all the time. A few months ago, we came up with a plan for the moon. So if you were involved in that discussion, sorry, we already have a plan for the moon, but it's okay. We'll probably come up with a plan for Mars next, actually. And then we're going to talk about, we talk about all sorts of topics. We talked about bridges, engineering, and we talked about mycology. What? We talked about pro wrestling, which is actually very scientific. You would be shocked. And that's coming from the muscle biologist, so I may be a little biased, okay? But we have a lot of fun here. So I invite you to come back in July when we restart. We always meet here. We will be meeting here at the last Tuesday of the month, July to November. We take December off so y'all can have a merry winter holiday. Also, it's too cold to get me out of the house. You best believe I will not be coming here in December. But July to November, we will be coming. And I will go ahead, I do not know July's book, but I will go ahead and spoil for you, because I bullied the rest of the Indiana Sciences Books Blues team into this. For November, we will be reading Service Berry, which is Robin Wall Kimmer's new book. And if you have not read Braiding Sweetgrass, it is not required reading, but it might be your summer homework. And if you need a good cry, also might be a good book, but maybe I'm just emotional. She's an incredible author. It's going to be a great time for November, perfect for Thanksgiving. But I just wanted to give that plug. And then again, I just want to thank our partners, Indiana Humanities, wonderful partners, Indiana Sciences, Strangebird, and of course, our partners who I forgot to mention at the top of the hour, our public libraries, our Indianapolis public libraries, who help partner with us to get these books out to you. Who need our support now more than ever. I say it again and again. Unfortunately, they do. The libraries need their support, the researchers need their support. Everyone gets a little round of applause today. So thank you all for rounding out our season of Books, Booze, and Brains. I hope to see you back in July to enjoy some beautiful patio weather and some wonderful food and drinks. And if you're on the live stream, get your butt here so we can have a good time together. All right. Thank you all so much. I'll see you after the summer. Thank you so much. So we're going to be the library. Gonna be a do. It's like, oh, yeah. Yeah, when you write your, yeah.
Well, okay, I used to live. You just blows my head off. And it's really.
Yeah, well, I mean, Rotary still has the billboards up for Folio. Folio still very much.
So I work in another I am quick in the name. I am. We should take it. Want to go back to?
Drop your name and email. We'll add you to the list. Turn off the lecture viewers. You always get a little extra. All right, ending the stream. Love you guys. Bye.